What is up, Fantasyland? It has been a while. It's been a while since we've had football. And tonight, of course, we've got the Hall of Fame game, Cleveland and the Jets going at it. It's been a while since we've had a GOAT District right here on this very channel, live via the GOAT District network. But tonight, we're back. And so is high stakes and redraft tournament crusher, Scott Connor. You know him from Trades in 5 and Dynasty and Chill. We're going to be deep diving into NFL news and headlines, ADP values and fades, draft strategies, roster construction, and a ton more. So grab yourself a cold one, sit back, and let's get.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? Welcome back to the GOAT District. Make sure you're signed up or subscribed to this very channel. Make sure you check us out on your favorite podcast platform. And make sure you check us out every Wednesday night on the Player Profiler Network, except for this week, Dan. We have a very special show dropping later tonight on the Player Profiler Network. After this show, you can catch Dan and I with one of the founders and owners of the FFPC for a bit of a backstage pass. And then we got Eric Balky from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on with us to deep dive into his favorite division, the NFC North. But first, tonight, guys, we have a monster show. One of our biggest guests. We're lucky to have him back on in the district. You know him from Dynasty Trades in 5 and Dynasty Chill. Scott Connor, welcome back to the district, brother.
Guys, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me back. Not Dynasty. I'm excited to talk some high stakes, and we are less than a month away from Vegas, so glad to be here.
Dan actually had to correct me, right, Dan? When we got together to do the show sheet, I was like, all right, man, let's get into this Dynasty. He's like, no. We're gonna go for the other section of his brain, the one that's gonna make people money. So, we had to get you in for some redraft, right, Dan?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we'll be clear. Both sides of Scott's brain will make you money.
As soon as I said it, I knew it. So I'm glad you corrected me. There you go.
But this is the side of Scott we see a little bit less of. So I'm always happy to get in here and talk about this kind of stuff with Scott. We'll be seeing each other in Vegas in just a little over a month. So. The time is drawing short, and it's definitely time to be figuring out what's our strategy, who are the players we're going to draft, all that good stuff. So we're going to dive into that tonight.
For sure. We appreciate you guys in the chat. You guys were early in the chat. We apologize being a couple minutes late. We were just getting this stuff ready for you guys. Let's start off. I'm actually going to pull up a little video as I go to you first, Scott. This is the time of year where you get those. I mean, all you see are clips, right? From training camp, like catches, thrown, drops, you name it. Unfortunately, some injuries. But the George Pickens catch is definitely one that caught a lot of people's attention. He's a very polarizing player in general. What are your thoughts on him? How bullish are you on the second-year receiver? And how are you approaching this receiving core overall in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I mean, I've been kind of definitely a hater of Pickens, and it gets to the point where really you have to look at where he's going to end up going relative to what other players in the same tier could be. And I think he's probably riding a little bit higher based on the name. And it's weird how you get to this point, but anybody that does projections, you kind of just project out what you think for the Steelers, and then you match that up with, even go to Vegas and look at Vegas over-unders on what you expect for George Pickens. But then you just look at the price relative to others in the same range. Like, to me, it's got to be an automatic fade on Pickens this year, just based on where he's going to go, based on stuff like those highlights. So I don't want to say he's somebody that I'll have zero exposure of, but if you put him side by side, he looks very similar to players like Mike Williams, like Gabe Davis, just in terms of how he wins. And he's also got a top 8 tight end in terms of market share command, and he's also got a top 12 receiver in terms of market share command on his own roster. And then you add in the fact, okay, it's one of those where if you're really high on George Pickens, you should be stacking Kenny Pickett on 2 QB build teams all over the place, because it probably means Kenny Pickett's going to go to a level where you're like, all right, I can platoon with him instead of him being just a waiver pickup quarterback. So I'm out on Pickens. I probably won't have much exposure. Then you have other players in there like Allen Robinson, who are just going to be a little annoying to the point where the concentration's probably not even going to be what you want. So just where he's going, there's other players I can take later, like the aforementioned Gabe Davis. I'd rather have him over Pickens.
Nice.
Literally, and I don't even like Gabe Davis, but I'm probably building my construction in a certain way, and they're placeholders. So if I'm drafting for a placeholder on my team, I'm probably going to take the cheaper versions. Dan,
how do you feel about it? And how impressed were you by the catch?
I mean, yeah, it was an impressive catch. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you say what you want. That's a hell of an athletic move. But I don't know. I mean, I put a little bit less stock into the training camp highlight reel videos, all that kind of stuff than probably most people, because the way I look at it is, these guys are professional athletes. They're supposed to be able to do stuff like this. Not every play, granted, and it's still cool when it happens, and worthy of applause and all that, but it's not, that highlight reel doesn't change my opinion of Pickens one bit. If anything, it just confirms, he's not a separator. So that's basically what it is. So I'm higher on Pickens than Scott probably is, but I'm not high on Pickens. So I will have a little bit, but yeah, I agree that Gabe Davis, guys like that are more likely to make it on my team than Pickens is.
I just rather get Deontay. Like, what is it? They're in the same round. I'm looking at right now Fantasy Pros. Actually, I didn't realize they're even in the same round. So for me, I'd rather go to Deontay, who had 0 touchdowns and got peppered with targets last year, and should probably get the same this year, just with some touchdowns, hopefully.
Well, let's do this real quick. Let's just go through a real basic exercise just so everybody can do this. And you can do this with every player. And this is something I urge people to do, especially if they're in only a couple high-stakes leagues. Let's say you've signed up for 1 main event, or you've put in for 2 drafts. Let me ask you both. How many pass attempts do you think the Steelers have this year? Just give me a number. 17 games. Throw out a number. Even if you're right or wrong, it's the exercise that's important.
I'm going to go with 500.
What was the question? Sorry, man. The wife's notifying me here.
All good. How many pass attempts for the Steelers this year, JD?
Oh. Yeah, 450.
450? Okay. To make it easy, let's go 5-10, right? That's 30 a game across 17 games. Real easy. Okay. So you look at Pickens last year. He had a 15.4% market share. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to get up to, let's give him the benefit of like 20% this year. Is that fair? Just because he's a second-year player. He was thrown into the fire right away. So all of a sudden, you take 5-10. What's 20% of that? 102 targets, right?
Yep.
Now, when I tell you, Dan, you're only getting 102 targets, does that excite you?
No. Definitely
now,
not.
At a certain price, it excites you, right? If you can get that at wide receiver 30, okay, that could be exciting.
Yeah.
So then you give him, okay, we're bumping his targets up to 20%. Then you look at what he did with his targets last year. Now, again, he can get better. But if you look at his market share was only 56th across the league last year. So then you look at what did he do with the targets that he got. You're talking his targets per route run, which 81st. So that's saying, okay, that might be a little bit over the skis with the 20%. He played a lot more than a lot of other guys, and he still only had 15%. Red flag number 1. 58th in yards per route run. Probably tells me that's not a guy that's going to get 1,000 yards or 1,100 yards. His over-under in Vegas is like 770. So keep that in the back of your mind. Let's give him 900 just for the benefit of the doubt, because obviously the Vegas lines milk in injury risk and all that stuff because they're shooting for a bet. It's not necessarily what you project. So let's give him 900. Okay, and then you look at his yak share, and then you look at his air yard share outside the top 50. So really the bet you're making on Pickens is, what are you going to give him? Maybe 60 catches, 900 yards on 100 targets? I mean, you can do the math right there. That's 150 PPR points over the course of 17 games. You're only at about 9 points a game. Are you betting on him to score 15 touchdowns? Again, if you're going to bet on him to score 15 touchdowns, that's how he probably delivers anything above replacement level value. Then you're probably too high on Deontay Johnson, and you're probably too high on Pat Freiermuth, and you're probably way too low on Kenny Pickett. So you work through there, and then you're like, all right, how am I going to value him above players that I literally can project for that same stuff? Zay Jones. Bet you can put those same projections for Zay Jones, but he's a throw-in. So it's just weird what we chase, but we don't actually do math to back it, and we just start chasing names. And Pickens is one of the guys I can see up a round or two by the time we get to Vegas for no reason other than people are excited about the highlights.
Yeah, I think it's mostly that, and people are looking for that sophomore leap, which a lot of players have, and I can understand that to a certain extent as well. But again, as you point out, this is not a high volume attack. And so there's just a limit to how far that, making that sophomore leap, which I think, what your exercise went through pretty much priced that in. But most people just say, sophomore leap,
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's kind of the, step one, this, step two, that, question mark, profit, that old meme. And nobody really knows exactly how they're getting there, but it's just like, he's going to make the leap.
Yeah.
On the clock, Scott, do you want George Pickens or Jahan Dotson?
Man, you asked me about two of the players that you look deeper into their production, and I don't like either one.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm glad I asked you then.
Okay. I think because the funny thing about projections is we play a week-to-week game, right? So I guess I could break that tie by saying in a given game, who do I think could give me a bigger ceiling if I had to construct around putting them in my starting lineup? I think you could probably justify Pickens over Dotson for that reason. But I think the idea is you want to construct a team to where you probably don't have much capital into a player into that range unless you acknowledge what they are. There's probably players that I'm rather taking at different positions in those ranges, probably running backs, to be honest, just because there are so many receivers in that flat range. It just doesn't really make sense to spend up. So I'd probably go with the cheaper one, but if you had to tell me which one I would pick for a week-to-week game, I'd probably lean Pickens very slightly. But I don't like Dotson, so it wasn't a fair question.
Okay. Dan, we might be higher on Dotson than Scott is.
I think probably so. I mean, I've picked Dotson several times over Pickens, so that's easily my answer. But
Same.
part of it is just I feel like there's a decent chance that Jacoby Brissett could start some games, and that could be good for Dotson compared to Pickett. I'm just not that high on Pickett, so we'll see how we go on that.
So I've been blessed as a Colts fan with a draft pick this year with Richardson, and it's been fun just seeing the hype about it. But it's not really the hype that gets me excited. It's more just kind of the perception people have of the kid that really impresses me and gives me, I don't see this guy not crushing the NFL, to be honest. Just his whole attitude, his whole approach. Every time I hear anything or any player even speak of him, very consistent messages. I mean, I'm not getting too caught up in the hype. He is a rookie quarterback, but I just like what I've seen so far. And I think I'm not the only one. We're starting to see a lot of hype with Richardson. I definitely like him in those big money tournaments where you're taking cracks, especially if he's like your QB2. Maybe you're doing like a 2 QB build. Where are you, Scott, on not only the quarterback, but this offense as a whole? Are there other pieces in there that you like or don't like, and maybe you can comment a bit on the Taylor situation?
Yeah, I've put out a couple videos on Trades in 5 about Jonathan Taylor. I do think I'm basically making the bet on Jonathan Taylor that he will not be there for when you need him this year. just based on what you know. He's going to still have to play. He's got to play 6 games to toll his contract, so he's going to have to play. But to sit here and say I'm betting on him being there available for the fantasy playoffs, that's not somebody that I'll probably have any in high stakes. So don't be, if you're in a draft with me, you don't worry that I'm going to snipe him from you. I'm probably not. So I'll just be flat out honest that I'm probably not going to be taking him. I will say on Richardson, JJ Zacharyason's talked about this. A lot of others have kind of put out some content about the offense and how they're going to funnel targets. They're not going to throw to the running backs a lot. And I think you can probably zoom in on, I'm a little higher on Michael Pittman now than I was 3 months ago because of that. But my strategy with Richardson, he's going in the 8th, 9th, 10th round. And people will say, man, I can't do that again. I did that with Justin Fields in his rookie year. In his second year, he didn't start off hot. Remember, everybody dropped Justin Fields at the beginning of last year. And it's not helping you. I mean, I had a team where I cut him in week 2. I can't deal with a guy throwing the ball 19 times. You know what I mean? So I cut him and people picked him back up. My strategy with Richardson is I'm actually drafting Richardson if I've already taken Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, somebody like that. I'm not trying to build a team where I go Kirk Cousins and Anthony Richardson. And I see people do that. Oh, man, I'll just use Cousins until Richardson comes into his own, right? No, I'd actually rather double down, protect, but more play defense against my opponents. If I draft Lamar Jackson, I'll take Anthony Richardson on that team. If I know I'm going to rely on Anthony Richardson, I'm probably not going to draft him unless I have a second quarterback that I know I can rely on. Because what am I doing, JD? I'm actually playing defense against the dude. I'm taking away one of the 4 or 5 guys that by week 9 could be matching my Lamar Jackson. He can ride on my bench, and it's at a cheap enough cost. What round? If you really want to get him, you got to take him in like round 8. Round 9, you can basically block everybody else and let them fight over Tua and Daniel Jones and those guys if they want to try to match yours. So I think you only take him in certain circumstances. I'm not building a team where I expect Richardson to be my QB1.
Well, or if you have to play matchups, like you mentioned Cousin, let's say Goff or one of those guys, you don't want him necessarily in a matchup situation, Dan, where you're going back and forth. Like I think that's the beauty of it. And that's why I got excited when you said that, Scott, because that if you have one of those top quarterbacks, and we're going to get into more strategy with the quarterbacks a bit later on in the show, he's the perfect guy, Dan. I don't know. I see you smiling there. We haven't even talked about AR that much, you and I, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
No, I'm right there with you. I mean, I do not like playing the quarterback matchup game, where you got 2 quarterbacks and you're trying to figure out which one to start each week. Sometimes it's an easy decision, but there's a lot of times where it can go wrong. So I try to stay out of that as much as possible. I'd rather be just riding one quarterback, hopefully a good one. So I'm tending to take the little bit more elite tier, and mixing Richardson in with them is something I've been doing a good bit of in the past month or so.
Guys, I've been hyping up a running back on this very show. I don't know, Dan. I don't know if I'm able to move the needle. I doubt it. But he's picking up steam, man. James Cook is a guy I've been a couple months now where I just thought he was going at such a value. I don't see, as much as I like Harris, I know what Damian Harris brings to the table, and I think that's what people are afraid of. I don't see that as much of a threat, especially considering what they didn't do in the rookie draft and what they haven't done so far. It doesn't mean they're not going to bring anyone in. There's still guys out there that they can easily bring in. But I just see talent. I see big play, potential out of this kid. He can catch the ball really nicely. And I see an offense that's just so thirsty for that type of player in it. I feel like that's maybe something that they're lacking even to take them to that next step, farther into the playoffs. So I think they're going to nurture that. I think they're going to give this kid every opportunity. And now you're starting to see the hype. So he was in round, I believe it was like in round 8. Now he's up to round 6. And that's just, I'm looking at like a July ADP versus the last 3 days. So he's definitely come up. Scott, where are you on Cook, and where do you sit when we're talking Buffalo Bills running back situation?
Yeah, so this is definitely a player that I can see being moved up to the 5th or 6th round when we get to Vegas, just because of the way it's not necessarily the player. Because I think it's fair to question whether James Cook ever will give you more than 200 touches in a season. Probably less, to be honest. But he's also one of those players where what you're betting on, he could essentially give you 80% of his production, and he never needs to carry the ball. And I think the key is building teams around him where you're forced to play him. The worst thing you can do, I think, is draft James Cook as like your RB4 and you go, I'm just going to keep him on my bench in case anything happens. If anything, what I'd rather do is draft him on a team where I go, you know what? I'm starting him every week. I'm going to kind of embrace the variance, knowing the way he's going to win could be fluky. You know, you can't probably predict when his touchdowns are going to come because they're going to come in chunks. They're going to come 30 yards and out sometimes. I mean, it's not going to be a guy where you go, the projection is going to look great every week. So I want to put him in spots where I know I'm going to use him. So he's perfect. He goes perfectly with one of those teams where you start, 3 receivers and a tight end or 3 receivers and a quarterback. And then you're just drafting. And what I see is a lot of people sometimes will just draft projected volume in those rounds and kind of ignore the fact that you can throw a guy like Cook in there if you're going to play him every week. Not flex him, but I'm playing him every week. And I'll ride the games where he only gets 4 targets and he only gets, because he's probably going to have games where he only gets 2 or 3 carries, right? Like they didn't sign Damian Harris and Latavius Murray to go, we got to give James Cook 10 carries. But I don't care. But I need to be in a spot where I can use him. Think about Nyheim Hines in his prime, and he's probably a better version of that. How many times did you go, damn, I didn't have Nyheim Hines in there. He scored 26 points. And then you started him next week because you go, he's got a floor of 5 for 50 every week. And then you get into one of those games and you're just praying they dump it down to him, and they never do. So I think you just have to roster construct around him. So we'll get into more roster construction theory, but I think he's going in a perfect spot where he can be one of your 3 running backs you take in that range when you don't take one until round 4 or round 5.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think Cook is somewhere between what we saw from Tony Pollard last year and what we, used to see from Nyheim Hines, or what we even maybe saw from Tony Pollard 2 or 3 years ago. It's kind of the range where I expect him to be in, because I don't think he's going to get a ton of carries. There's no reason for him to. Everybody's talking up the fact that his offensive coordinator is saying he's got 3 down capability and he can play on all 3 downs and all that. And while all that is technically true, that doesn't say that that's what they're going to do, is sit there and play him on all 3 downs and hammer him up the middle, 15 times a game or whatever. That would just be ludicrous for a team like that to do. They need to use him as a weapon. So, to me, he's a little bit more like, a more fairly priced, to me, Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I see him. I was actually trying to look up Alvin Kamara and think, like, can he be Alvin Kamara? I mean, size-wise, he's definitely missing about 14 pounds and a gold tooth. But that's kind of how I see him, Dan, is that Jahmyr Gibbs, kind of big play guy, and that's the thing, right? He's kind of a cheaper version at this point, because Gibbs is creeping into the second, last I checked.
Yeah.
Thanks to Theo. So one guy that's had a very interesting up and down ADP wise, I mean, most of it has been in the first round based on my experience. But Dan, when we started drafting in January, Cooper Kupp wasn't like a top 3, top 4 receiver, right? Guys like me were afraid to go near him. Not necessarily like afraid to go near him. It was more, again, opportunity cost. The other guys that were kind of available, like the Tyreek Hills and so on. Now we saw him creep back up. In some drafts, he was the wide receiver 3, the wide receiver 4. Now he's kind of, he's obviously got the injury, I believe it's a hamstring, right? Is it hamstring? Yeah.
Yep.
Which we all know with receivers can just be annoying. It could be like an all-season thing. I don't know how severe, if they've said it, how severe or not, but it's one of those things that can linger with a receiver. So now he's kind of back. Last I checked on this board, like I said, it's kind of the last 3 days. He's going at the 7 spot, so as the wide receiver 5. Scott, where were you with Kupp before the injury, and how much has it moved, if at all, this hamstring situation?
I mean, we'll know what the word is in 4 weeks. I do think if there's any sort of question, then he's probably going to start pushing towards the back half of the first round. Like you could justify taking CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra St. Brown, like those guys over him, if there's still questions about the injury. I was never Kupp ahead of Tyreek Hill, just because what Tyreek Hill did last year, I mean, literally he was the best receiver in every.
Is he year 3? Is he year 3, Scott? Your wide receiver 3, Hill?
I mean, yes, because I don't think there's any upward movement for Tyreek Hill, given where he's at now. So I can see why people take Jefferson and Chase over him. But, man, I mean, you just look at what he did last year. There isn't a thing he did last year that was not like top 3 in the league. Everything. And there's nobody else that was literally number 1 or number 2 in every single category you could look at. So it's hard for me to put Kupp over him just because I think Tyreek has a better quarterback. And I think the only argument for Kupp is people just see, man, he could have 200 targets. Like they could just never stop throwing to him. And I don't necessarily care about that. If I know all the receivers in this range in the first round are going to get 30% market share. I'm not worried about the difference between 170 and 190. So I would still lean Tyreek, but I can definitely see if there's no word on Kupp positively by the time we get to Vegas, there's going to be maybe 5 or 6 receivers taking him. And I drew 3 109s and a 110. Ooh. So I'm actually kind of hoping that's going to be the perfect range where I'm hoping there's a little bit of a question about Kupp to where if I want to get some exposure, I don't have to take him at 105 or 104. There'll be the rogue draft where he falls to the 109 and I can get a share there instead of having to take him a little bit earlier. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I've already seen some drafts where he's going 108, 109. So, yeah, I think that's going to happen. I think if there's any question at all as we roll into Vegas, he's going to be slipping into the second round. So right now, basically, I see Tyreek and Kupp as being a little bit two sides of the same coin. I mean, both of them are huge volume monsters. They kind of win different ways, but both of them have quarterbacks that have some serious question marks around their health. Both of them are going to be, like I say, the dominant targets. So, I've been taking both Kupp and Tyreek up until now. This has definitely pushed Tyreek ahead of Kupp for me, just because I know I can get Kupp later. I don't need to draft him at 104 or 105 anymore. I can wait a little bit and grab him and make some more unique builds that I didn't have access to before. So, whereas with Tyreek, there's just no chance of that.
Scott, everybody's already told me I'm crazy, so tell me why I'm crazy having A.J. Brown as my wide receiver 4 after Hill. And why can't he be?
I don't think you're crazy at all. I think when you get past probably Jefferson and Chase, you can argue a large tier of receivers. It's actually very similar in Dynasty, which is funny because we don't really view these guys much differently in Dynasty. It's just Dynasty, we give credit to some of the younger guys and push them up. Yeah. Like Wilson and Olave, but there is that second tier of receivers in Dynasty, just like redraft, where it's like, man, I'm going to have to spread out my exposure between Brown and Lamb and Amon-Ra and Diggs and Kupp and Tyreek, and I want to get a little bit of all of them, but I also don't want to go too heavy on one of them because all of them pretty much win in every facet. The only one that's probably an outlier is St. Brown, but even that, like, you look at St. Brown and you look at his numbers through his 28 games that he's played, he's slightly lower on the team air yards share than Cooper Kupp has been, but he's literally like a mini version of Cooper Kupp, and Jared Goff created Cooper Kupp. So, I mean, it's kind of like, it's hard to push him down. So I don't think you're crazy, JD. I just don't think you can say he's my wide receiver 4 and I'm taking him 4 out of 6 drafts. Every time. You got to diversify in that range, which is nice when you get different draft slots as well.
Yes. No, for sure. I just feel like I'm crazy. Dan looks at me like I got 3 heads every time. I'm just,
Not necessarily, no. Remember, I'm the original AJ.
I know, you're the OG, bro. You're the OG 101, AJ Brown 101.
But I don't know. I think he's definitely in that range too. And like Scott said, you want to have access to all these guys, and what I'm just kind of hoping for is that I can find places where they fall, where I can get a slightly different build than the normal, or and that's where if I'm like heavy on Tyreek Hill, for example, there I can push AJ Brown up. To get a slightly different build as well, just because I have the luxury of doing it because I'm already heavy on, Tyreek Hill or Cooper Kupp or whatever.
Where do you draw the line?
That's a good question. Where do you draw the line, Scott, in redraft?
Do you have, because we started talking earlier about like ownership and stuff a bit. We were talking about other stuff, but I was wondering, Scott, do you have like when you're looking at your percentages ownership volume wise, I have kind of like a max that I want my most owned guy. Kendre Miller is really close to that right now, but what's your max, if you have one?
So I play it a little bit differently in redraft. I mean, I'm in enough leagues, but I don't think enough to really leverage the diversification. For me, it's going to be more about, I'm only doing 30 high stakes leagues. Now, a lot of them are high stakes, but I don't have enough to say, you know what, I'm just going to go purely based on diversification here, just let another draft go by and really care about my player shares. So it's more about roster construction. I think if I would say in the first couple rounds, I'm going to probably try to spread out the risk just a little bit as you get a little bit cheaper, as you get in certain pockets. Like we were talking earlier about the receivers down in the wide receiver 30 to 50 range. If you really like somebody there, if you think you have one in that range that can finish top 24, can give you 4 or 5 weeks where you're designing a roster around, hey, I'm drafting Gabe Davis as my wide receiver 4, and I'm going to start him every week. And I think he's going to have 5 top 12 weeks. If you build around that, like I'm fine having exposure to him in 100% of my leagues because it's at a 10th round price, Yeah. So, and especially at running backs too. I think this year I'm going to not really care about my exposure rates at running backs at all. I don't care if I'm in on the same running back or 2 running backs outside of like the first or second round, which I probably won't be taking a lot of running backs there anyway. I don't really care if I have James Conner in every league or I have James Cook in every league because I think running back's going to be so replaceable. We saw it last year. The guys that we were playing in the tournament and even in the fantasy playoffs, like have we ever seen a point in fantasy football where the high-end running backs are not only not scoring like they used to 5 years ago, but the volatility because of the contracts, because of the injuries, all that stuff, like it's at an all-time high. So I'm not really worried about running back exposure unless it's, okay, I take McCaffrey in 1 league. I'm probably not going to take him in 2 leagues. Outside of that, though, I don't care. So receiver exposure at the high end, I'll probably diversify a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, Dan, that's kind of right. The higher you are in the draft, the more you want to the first desert. I knew I was going to mess that up. I knew I was going to
desertify.
You guys can say it for me. There you go. But no, it's kind of like a rule of, a kind of easy rule that people listening can kind of go by if they're not necessarily paying attention yet. Do you have a number, guys, like Dan, where you're like a number of leagues that you need to have in order to worry about ownership, or is it just, you just kind of, it's always in the back of your mind, you're tracking it? I know you track everything, and you're like a spreadsheet guy, so.
Yeah, typically I don't worry too much about player ownerships, especially now when I know I have a bunch of more drafting going in front of me. I'll take a look at my exposures probably around mid-August before we really start getting it, before I start drafting main events and all that kind of stuff. And just kind of see where I'm at, and then just sort of reassess the entire landscape before I dive into the main events and figure out how I want to attack those. But for now, I think I have probably like 30% plus of a couple 3 players, and it doesn't bother me at all. I mean, they're not early in the draft. They're mostly like round 6 or later, I would say. Early in the draft, I do try to keep things reasonably well diversified and get shares, at least some of nearly everybody.
Yeah, I'm like even Kendre, I'm 25%. Kendre and Jelani Woods, not to give out too many names we're going to talk about later, but so let's kind of, before we narrow in on positions, because we're going to talk, we want to help you guys in your drafts right now, whether it's best ball, redraft, you're doing big tournaments, you're doing 12-man leagues. You want to know who you need to fade at ADP. You want to know who you should be walking out of at ADP. We're going to be touching on each position, each one of those categories. We'll talk fades. But first, Scott, give us one major value that you're seeing right now, no matter where you're drafting, that you think can move significantly between now and the time you, Dan, and I are having a beer on Theo in Vegas.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes to if I could lock in these shares now at the current price, I probably would. I think Brandon Ayuk is one where I can see him jumping up into like the 3rd or 4th round by the time we get to Vegas, just depending on the type of receiver room that you're in. how heavy the receivers are in the draft. I mean, you guys know when you get to a main event, you either get the, oh man, this is going to be 36 receivers went in the first 5 rounds just because of the way the draft is, or it's a draft that's typical of what you see typically past years in the FFPC, where where the running backs are going to go. So I think right now he's one that's going in round 5, round 6, but slowly, especially if you look at some of that stuff we were talking about earlier with with Tyreek and with Cup, but with George Pickens. I mean, a lot of people, if you ask them, you'd go, man, there's not a huge difference between George Pickens and Brandon Ayuk. But Pickens is one where, he's wide receiver 31 right now, and I don't really see him. There's no world where I think he can really get higher than that. Ayuk, you look at where Ayuk is going, and he's wide receiver like 22, 24. I could see people saying, you know what, he's 29.
Yeah, in the last this is Fantasy Pros Championship the last 3 days.
Yeah, I'm looking at a main event board from last night where he's going like early to mid 6th round, but I can see that people kind of pushing him up to the range where you're seeing the Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, if not higher. Like I think people not quite like T. Higgins, Devontae Smith range, but if you really look at the numbers, like, can you compare him to somebody like T. Higgins or Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith? Like, it's not terribly far off. I think it's just the fear of the offense. People don't know what it's going to look like. They're not sure about the quarterback. But by the time we get to Vegas, we're probably going to have a much better idea on that. So Ayuk is a guy I'd probably be willing to take in round 4. And I can see him being the name that gets moved up there because apparently he's having a really good camp.
I feel like we've heard Dan recently a show that I'm trying to think who brought him up just recently is Ayuk has been coming up a bit now.
Yeah, he's definitely becoming more and more of a hot name. As Scott said, he's had a great camp, and there's a lot of pieces in place for him. He's showed good progression. As he's been in the NFL, and so it's reasonable to expect he has not reached his peak yet. How about you, JD? I don't want to take your guy, so I want to hear who you've got because I've got a couple guys in mind, and one of them might be yours. So.
Yeah, I mean, I always, me, man. I'm all about like walk the walk. So I usually go to my ownership. Then because then you guys know it's not BS. We're gonna go through positions, but Kendre Miller for me, I love grabbing him. But really, like when you're talking tight end premium, Jelani Woods to me is just like criminally cheap right now, and I just love the upside. And then my third guy would be Antonio Gibson.
All right, there you go. I can definitely see that. I'm going with J.K. Dobbins because right now he's dropping down into the late 6th, even early 7th round in a lot of leagues. Not quite so far back in the fantasy pros, but in the best ball leagues, he's been dropping down a little. Well, actually, as I look, in fantasy pros, he's been dropping down into the 6th round, so quite a bit more.
He's dropping. Yeah, there's a lot of concern right now. Right?
This is a guy that when he reports, he could easily bounce right back up into the 4th round, maybe even 3rd round. So right now I think is the time to get my shares on him. So I've been loading up on him just because I'm not really concerned at all that he's going to hold out and miss games or anything like that. He's going to come in. He's going to play his games.
You think he goes back kind of, remember like early offseason, J.K. Dobbins was such a value. We talked about it often. Maybe he goes back in that range before he comes back up.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know how much farther he can sink because you start getting into some real sketchy backs. But, to me, Dobbins is not a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor can afford to sit out and play the minimum of 6 games. J.K. Dobbins cannot afford to do that. If he wants a good contract next year, he's got to get on the field and prove that he's the runner and receiver that he supposedly has the potential to be.
Is Gus Edwards still the only guy, Scott, behind him? Because you don't hear anything of like a lot of people. J.K. Dobbins has been polarizing all offseason, but the people who don't necessarily like him, I don't hear another name coming out.
Well, I mean, they just signed Melvin Gordon. They gave him $3 million.
Oh, that's right.
Which is not a nothing contract in today's running back market. Now, it's Melvin Gordon and it's Gus Edwards. So I'm not going to sit here and say, man, there's a threat to Dobbins. I was in on Dobbins just for his historic efficiency has been really good. He's still managed almost a 13% target rate with the old Baltimore offense. The only thing I'd say about Dobbins is if I'm going to draft Dobbins, and I do think if all this stuff gets squashed before we get to Vegas, people are going to be right back in on it because they're in on Baltimore's offense. I want to be in, and I want to correlate Dobbins with, you're betting on Dobbins. Let's say he goes back up to, he could get to round 3 if there's no threat of a holdout. You know what I mean? Like, people could be drafting him inside the top 15 running backs, up where they're taking Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, like, if not higher, Jahmyr Gibbs,
especially
Joe
if
Mixon.
guys drop, right? As new players come in,
Yes.
they sign guys, Ramondre drops or one of these guys.
Well, Ramondre and Breece Hall right now are going in round 3. If either one of those signs Dalvin Cook or Zeke Elliott, they will be, maybe they won't fall, but they will be less preferred than the guy like Dobbins that people don't see that has any competition. But I think you got to make a bet on the specific types of offense for Baltimore. If you're going to bet on Dobbins, for him to pay off, you need to bet against the Ravens' passing attack. And what I mean is you probably don't want to draft Dobbins and Mark Andrews on the same team. You may want to even consider like Lamar Jackson and Dobbins on the same roster just for, hey, I'm going to get a ton of rushing touchdowns. And if he throws more, you got to hope he's going to, because it's not that Baltimore didn't throw to the running backs. They threw at the lowest rate, but we know about it for fantasy. We see it for fantasy also because they throw at a very low volume and a low rate. So now we're going, Dobbins doesn't get any receptions. He doesn't need 70 receptions. If he can get 40, you're going to be ecstatic because he is like a 5.2 yards per carry for his career, and they're probably going to score a lot of touchdowns. So just correlate your bets is all I'm saying if you're going to draft a guy like Dobbins. If you're fading him, it might be good to fade, just him and then buy into the Ravens pass catchers a little more aggressively.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I don't have too much of a problem with, like Dobbins and then grab somebody like Zay Flowers later.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a little bit tough to take Dobbins and Andrews on the same team.
So another guy that's starting to pick up a bit of steam is Flowers. Guys, let's get into fades. We Scott, you talked about fades. We're gonna kind of get into position. We'll go position by position just to kind of give the audience a little help at each spot as they go through the draft, as they're building their builds. And we'll touch upon, we'll try to give you guys where these guys are going. I pulled up the main event ADP, Scott, so I've got that one and the fantasy guys. But let's start off at quarterback. Who's kind of your biggest fade right now at ADP? And while you're thinking, can I ask you this, Scott? Because I meant to kind of walk in with this. Do you not find that with quarterbacks, we've got the ADP pretty, like, there's not a lot of areas where I'm looking at it and I think guys should be moving around. Like, I feel like we've got the ADP pretty good with quarterbacks right now. I don't know if that's just me or how you feel about it.
I think we do. I do think we've gotten, so I've basically committed this entire year to draft all of my teams based on WARP or wins over replacement. And when you really plug in the FFPC scoring, now it's different if you play NFFC or it's different in every format that you're in. But when you plug it into, we have a WARP tool, southharmonff.com. You literally plug in like an FFPC league and you look at the scoring and you look at the distribution of wins over replacement at this quarterback spot. Okay. Because with the FFPC quarterback scoring, you look at the graph. And if I showed it to you guys, you'd see it and it doesn't tell you what names are going to be there next year, right? It doesn't predict where players are going to finish. But if you just look at the trends of how the distribution has gone over the last couple of years, you'd immediately sit there and you go, man, the bad spot to draft quarterbacks is the guys where you are taking higher than many others that are a couple rounds lower, but you're sitting there saying, okay, if I draft Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, if I told you, JD, you get Trevor Lawrence at quarterback 8 and he finishes quarterback 6, are you happy? Yes or no? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you got your money's worth.
You'd say you got what you paid for, right?
Yeah.
But then you look at where you spent that price on Trevor Lawrence. You took him in round 7. And you took him 4 rounds ahead of Tua, Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did you probably spend 4 rounds higher on Lawrence? There's one of 2 reasons, right? A, I thought Lawrence could be even better than QB6. I don't think Tua can be QB1. you could squint and see a world where Trevor Lawrence just blows up, right? There's like that 5% that he just becomes the next Mahomes. It's possible, right? The other part is you probably feel a little safer week to week. Man, I can't trust Tua, man. What if he gets another concussion? Then I'm lost. But then you look at the above replacement of where you're drafting those guys and where they're likely to finish. The reality is if you draft Tua at around 11 and he gets another concussion and he retires during the season, what you're picking up off waivers really isn't that big of a difference versus what you just lost. You know what I mean? And you literally wasted 4 extra picks. So I immediately go to, all right, if I'm drafting Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson, just because I feel a little safer about them and they have this mythical upside where I'm not sure any of those 4 I would bet to finish in the top 3. So I think that's where the bad quarterback value is. But I get it. People get scared. They don't feel comfortable with Daniel Jones as their QB1. They don't feel comfortable with, and it's to what Dan said earlier. There's nothing worse than in a league like the FFPC where you have Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins, and you have to pick the one to start every week. You've just set yourself up for, I'd say based on the warp chart, you have 2 good quarterbacks. But the stress of having to make that decision, doesn't it feel like that, Dan? People will take the Herbert or Burrows higher just because they go, I can justify starting this guy every week and I never have to be stressed over the decision. If you can lean against that and not be tempted to draft yourself just to be comfortable, I think that's a bad range just based on the data that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I take away from that is you really want that quarterback you draft in that range to have top 3 outcome. Basically, if you're taking Justin Herbert, you're taking him because you think he can be a top 3 quarterback. You think he's got a good chance of it. Certainly he's probably got a decent floor, but it's the ceiling that really matters when you're taking the elite quarterbacks. And so you gotta take guys that you know.
We lose Dan.
Frozen. We lost Dan.
Frozen in Minnesota.
I think on the contrary, though.
Oh, there you go. He's back.
You good, Dan?
No, you might have to leave and come back. All good.
I was going to say on the contrary, JD, I agree with him about finishing top 3, top 4, right? But damn, it's also, you could also get burned if you take Josh Allen in round 2 and he finishes QB4. You know what I mean? Like,
opportunity cost.
It definitely. So that, I mean, the only thing about Josh Allen is he's literally finished QB 1, 2, 1 the last 3 years. So it's like if there's a guy you can say is probably a good bet to finish top 3, it's him. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely right now Mahomes, Allen, and Jalen Hurts are all going in like the top 30 picks. Would it shock you if one of those guys finishes outside the top 4?
I'd probably put money on it.
just based on sheer variance, right? Like whatever, injury, missed games, just whatever. It just variance. You could say that's probably not a good bet for that to be 1, 2, 3. It's like trying to bet who finishes 1, 2, 3 in a horse race. Having to get all 3 right is not a good bet. So I just think you got to kind of diversify in that range. But it's tough for me because if I take a guy like Lawrence, I still feel like I want to take another quarterback because just based on the platoon that I was talking about earlier. So, but you can't. If you spend a round 7 pick on a QB, like you don't want to take another one in round 10. You don't really want to take another one at all because you go, if I have to go to the waiver wire, I'll just pick up the replacement value because it's not that big of a difference.
Yeah,
so I struggle with that.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, like, obviously, the later you wait, the more you're probably willing to take that second quarterback. But if you take one of those top guys, it's really hard to invest, especially the shallower FFPC builds. You backed in?
God, I hope so.
The
internet just totally took a crap, so I'm on a hot spot now.
Nice. So I rudely didn't even ask our guest tonight. Did you have a hard out, Scott?
No, I can go. Let's get through it. We're good.
All right, let's boogie. So Dan, who's your fade at quarterback right now?
Yeah, my fade at quarterback is Deshaun Watson because out of those elite, 8, 9 quarterbacks, he's the one I see with the smallest chance to really get up there and be a top 3 quarterback. So that's who I've been fading.
Yeah, I'm fading a guy who I was calling a value earlier in the season, and I'm looking now and I didn't realize how late he was going. So he might not even be. It might be a mistake to fade him because of how cheap he is. But you know what? Just to get your thoughts on this guy, I'll use him as my quarterback fade. Kyler Murray like seemed like a value at the beginning of the season. Now you're hearing stuff like he might not even play at all this season just because of kind of where Arizona is as a team, as a franchise. Dan, I see you kind of. I know he's a guy you like, and go ahead.
Yeah, he's more of a fade for me in best ball. And I like Kyler Murray, but 2023, this is not going to be his year. I think it's pretty much just that simple. Even if he does come back, I don't expect him to get back to full mobility. And I look at him. This is bad to say, but I almost look at him a little bit more like a running back who I rarely take after ACLs, especially ones that happen late in the year, because mobility is such a big part of his game. And when I'm looking at a quarterback who needs to move around like he does, and that's just a part of how he plays the position. I don't want any part of that while he's trying to work his way back from an ACL. So, if he gets me weeks 15 to 17, oh well, hat tip to whoever happened to draft him and hold him all that time, but it won't be me.
And that's the thing. If he is going this late, you can kind of build that tournament, where you want that week 15 to 17 playoff run to give an injection of Kyler Murray. Maybe you're telling that story in one of your whatever builds, but I don't know. You got anything on Scott on Kyler?
I mean, if you're drafting mains right now, he's going in like round 16, 17, 18. So it's literally a free pickup.
No.
He's very similar to Watson last year. Everyone knew Watson was going to miss 11 games. So it was like, there's no way. And I'm guilty. I drafted it in some leagues and cut him. And the one thing I learned was, how many leagues I also picked him up round week 4, week 5, week 6, because everyone else had cut him. So you have to have a plan. If you're going to take Kyler Murray in week 17, and then you find out he's going to be on the PUP list and miss 6 games, don't cut him. You drafted him for a specific reason. Don't build your team around, oh, man, if he goes on the PUP list or he's going to be out half the season, I'm going to cut him. Construct from the beginning to where, okay, I'm taking him with a second QB that has, or with a first QB that I can start every week. I don't need to platoon. Maybe they have a later bye week. Like, he fits perfectly if you took Josh Allen. He fits perfectly if you took Justin Fields. They don't have buys until week 13. So what are you doing, JD? You're holding a guy that could potentially match one of those guys away from somebody else. You have a specific intent for drafting him. So I think you just see you're either in or out, but I see too many people pick him, like Watson last year, and then they go, oh, man, I need a running back off waivers in week 3, and they cut him. So why did you draft him in round 16? Like, what news were you hoping for, Dan, that made me say I'm going to keep him? Versus, you're going to need roster spots, right? Like, don't draft him and then go, oh, man, I'm in a pinch. I need to cut him for that third tight end.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. I mean, if I feel like I've got a great roster and I'm just like, wow, man, this thing has really come together. I'm feeling great about this team. Then I might be willing to go with a 19-man roster for, 6, 8, 10 weeks, whatever it takes, while Kyler's on the mend. But again, even then, I'm pretty much out on him just because I think it's going to take him a while to knock off the rust, even after he does get back. So, I'll be surprised if I have any Kyler Murray at all this year.
Running back position, Scott, my favorite position to talk about. I mean, they're the least paid out of all these positions, but I still love my running backs. And it's funny, I don't draft them early, but I just that position just fascinates me for some reason. But who's a guy that you're fading right now at the running back position at ADP?
I mean, to be fair, we're using ADP right now, so it's got to be Jonathan Taylor. People are still taking him in the second round. I think that will correct though as we get closer to Labor Day and past that. I think if he hasn't reported, I just don't see him. Can't see anybody using a second round pick on him because there's too much smoke out there. Again, what I said at the beginning, he has to play 6 games, but I just don't. There's so many factors where you can go A, what's happened in public between him and the Colts. B, the fact that he already has a bye week right in week 11. So, I mean, what is your thoughts on him playing the second half of the year? Like, assuming he doesn't just say, I'm going to show up at the end of the season and get my 6 games in there. Unless you're projecting the Colts to be a playoff team, him and Josh Jacobs both scare me in terms of they're going to be there in week 14, 13, 15, 16, 17. So if they're going 2 rounds discount, sure. If I can get Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs in round 4, I'll take the gamble. But if I'm literally having to decide between Nick Chubb and Jonathan Taylor, like I'm just not even going to mess with it. Not even going to take the risk. I don't have enough teams to hedge against just blow 2nd-round picks on Jonathan Taylor because I don't think what he gives you is that much higher than what some of the other guys can either. I don't think his ceiling's particularly that high with Richardson at quarterback either.
Yeah, totally makes sense. If wherever you're looking at drafting Taylor, just take a wide receiver instead. It's kind of the easy way to go about it. For my fade, I'm going to go with Ramondre Stevenson, the guy who's right after Jonathan Taylor in ADP. Partially because you already took Jonathan Taylor, but also I think Stevenson just has a ton of risk because we've seen how the Patriots historically run their backfield, and I know everybody's saying, well, Ramondre Stevenson was different. Well, he was only different because he had no choice. I mean, basically New England had a whole ton of either injured and or rookie running backs that Bill Belichick didn't really trust. Ramondre Stevenson was the only guy I trusted last year. I don't see him doing that again. Everybody's drafting him like he's going to have this huge workhorse role, whether they sign Leonard Fournette or whether Pierre Strong comes on and takes a good chunk of the receiving game, whatever. I just can't take Stevenson at his ADP in the early 3rd, late 2nd.
Scott, do you agree?
I think it's hard for me to take running backs there over receivers. I'm not out on Stevenson, but I can see where Dan's coming from. It's probably priced at close to his ceiling. I am pretty encouraged though, looking at, his opportunity share and also his target share. Like it is a little better than I think people give him credit for. Like not to the like Kamara, McCaffrey, Eckler range, but clearly like a tier above even some of the running backs that are going in the same range. So I'll have a couple of Ramondre, but I can see where he gets up into the 2nd round. And partially to Dan's point, if there is questions about Jacobs, if there is questions about Jonathan Taylor reporting, you're going to see Stevenson in round 2 because people are going to push those guys out. So he's going to automatically be RB 6, 7, 8 because there isn't anybody else, which is probably going to be where I'm like, all right, I'll pivot to Jacobs or Taylor if they're going in round 4 now. So I can definitely see him moving up for that reason just because other players fall out, which, then he would be a fade.
Dan, I'm going to your Vikings for my fade. Madison, I don't know, man. He's going too high. Round 5 for me is a little much. That's in a fantasy pros. I haven't looked at the reason I didn't pull up the main was just because it was July, August. I feel like it's kind of a wide range, whereas the fantasy pros was the last 3 days. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. But I don't know. I haven't been sold on Madison. I think it's just because the other 2 guys or the other 2 options behind him are so much cheaper. Scott, do you think the Vikings bring someone in, or how do you feel about Madison at this 5th round price tag?
If they bring someone in, that his ADP gets nuked. If they don't, I'm fine with where he's going. Because I think he is a replacement level dead zone running back that right now has a good situation, which is why he's going in round 5 versus round 8. But I think if you fade him, you're just betting that something changes that we're unaware of. So I think it's just more a fear that I haven't seen it from Madison, so I'm going to fade. But you have to acknowledge there's a lot of other running backs that are literally like dead zone running backs in that same range. Literally what is the difference between Madison and Dameon Pierce or Madison and Cam Akers? You know what I mean? Like, it's just pick your poison. If you don't like him, that's fine, but I don't think I would fade him just based on I haven't seen it. If the situation changes, yeah. But it sounds like you're betting the situation changes, JD. Like you're worried about them signing somebody, which clearly by the time we get to Vegas, we're going to know that. Did they sign Kareem Hunt? Did they, you know what I mean? We're going to know that.
And they might just wait to see what the other 2 show them in D-Wayne
Very true.
And Ty, right? Between now and what, because there's no rush. I mean, these running backs are out there. They don't need to rush to the store because there's like a, shortage or anything.
Dan, do you get a sense though do you get a sense that as a Vikings fan, they really don't care about the running back position this year, that they're willing to just kind of let it suck? And
they're just launching the ball. That's why.
All the coach speak is actually that they care a lot about having an improved running game. They see that basically they like the underlying metrics of what Madison did versus what Cook did as far as success rate, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think they're committed. They know that their passing game needs the running game to also be able to carry its water for their passing game to truly hit, unlock the total ceiling. So interestingly, I think almost the worse the other guys do, whether you're talking about Nwangwu or Chandler or was it McIntosh?
McBride.
McBride, yes, thank you. It's like the worse they do, the more likely Madison is to have competition. The better they do, the less likely Madison is to have competition. So, if you're a Madison supporter, if you're drafting a lot of Madison, you really almost want to see Chandler and McBride do well, and or at least reasonably well. Not well enough to take his job, but at least well enough to hold down that backup position where they feel good and they don't have to go out and get Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt or somebody like that.
Good point. Very good point.
Yep. We keep Dan around for a reason, just every once in a while.
Because I have funny looks when I freeze on screen. That's
1912 might capture one of those and drop. He's
God.
pretty good with those videos.
I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, we love those. Let's go to receivers, guys. I want to get to you, Scott, and some of the stuff you're doing out there, and because you're crushing it. And I feel like I should have done it a while ago, but we start talking, and it's hard to kind of get off the topics, one after the other here. So let's talk receiver and tight end, and then we'll find out all about all your goodness, and you might even slip a little news that I saw today out there in Twitter. Who's a receiver you're fading right now at ADP?
Man, it's hard for me to pick, but I probably would go to that high end range of the, I don't want to call it the dead zone, but it's really where it starts to flatten off at receiver production. So right around like 18 to 36, maybe a little bit higher than that. So I probably look at the high end of that range and I go, okay, what range of outcomes? Like a lot of people I've heard say they don't like Drake London in like round 4, right? Because I don't really like his offense or whatever. But I think one of the things people forget is there is an element of what if we're a little bit wrong on what a team is going to be, and is the player talented enough to take that by the reins if we are wrong about the situation. So I'm not saying I would take Drake London where he's going, but I could understand getting some exposure to him just in case, because I think most people agree he's better than his situation. So if we're wrong about his situation, it makes sense to have some exposure. So I'm looking at players that are going in the same range, but I also don't look at a situation where it changes for the better because of who the player is. Honestly, I would say right now Christian Watson is a big fade for me, going in like the early 4th. He's being priced higher than a lot of other receivers that I think are in that same dead zone. But you're also making a bet on a quarterback that's never played. And I've heard really good things about Jordan Love, so it's not even an indictment on Jordan Love. But, really look historically back at quarterbacks that have never started games and A, their volume, and B, their efficiency in their first year. I don't really think you can expect much more out of Jordan Love than you are going to get out of Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, which historically is not going to be like top 12 quarterback. You know what I mean? So you're not going to have a quarterback that is elevating the weapons. And then you have 2 other receivers that are still going inside like the top 70 receivers with Doubs and Jaden Reed. So it feels like I'd almost rather bet on one of those guys than Watson at like wide receiver 14, 15, wherever he's going right now. Because I'm shocked. I'm looking at this main board right now. He went ahead of Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Hopkins, Deebo Samuel, Drake London, like almost end of round 3, which is that's a lot of conviction on Christian Watson to take him inside the top 40 picks. I mean, that's very, very high conviction on a player where I'm not sure about that.
And that's where he's going, Dan, in the Fantasy Pros last 3 days, same end of the 3rd. Too pricey for you?
Yeah, that's getting too pricey for me. I mean, with Watson, you just basically it's a bet on the talent, which he displayed a lot of last year. But it's, man, at those prices, that's pretty hard. So yeah, I'd be fading him there too.
Who's the guy you're fading, Dan?
Yeah, I think really for my fade, it's kind of a weird one, but I'll go with DK Metcalf. I just don't know that with them adding another wide receiver in there, I'd rather take Tyler Lockett at his ADP than DK Metcalf at his, because Lockett and Metcalf usually finish around the same level every year anyway. And I just don't see the reason to pay that huge premium. I mean, I think Metcalf is priced basically at his absolute ceiling right now. I'd feel a lot better about him if he was going in the late 4th, early 5th. What about you,
Scott?
JD?
Sorry, guys, I'm muting because I'm typing. I'm trying to type while you're going there, and I'm trying not to give the typing sound in the thing there. But I laughed because, Dan, I'm looking at the ADP, and it's literally Watson, DK Metcalf, and then the guy that I'm bringing up as they're literally like right beside each other at the end of the 3rd round. So you guys can just imagine who my guy is. But Scott, why don't you give your thoughts on the Seattle receiver?
No, I mean, I think Dan nailed it. You're both of those players. I think in your mind, you're sitting there going, all right, if I'm taking them in the 3rd round, I'm betting on an outcome that's a little bit higher than that. Do I have to spend this price to get this production? And I don't want to look at players and I go, you know what, if I get the production that I drafted them for, I'm happy with that. So I totally agree with Dan. What if we're wrong about Seattle? What if it's last year's efficiency can't be repeated? 2, I think we're already, I've heard numerous people say it, is everyone's just assuming that it's either Tyler Lockett or JSN. What if it's JSN and Tyler Lockett and not DK Metcalf? Like, that's in the range of outcomes yet. And don't get me wrong, it's not like Lockett and JSN are cheap. But doesn't it feel like the narrative out there, Dan, is it's Lockett or JSN? If you're in on JSN, you're fading Lockett, but neither of them are going to touch Metcalf, and I don't necessarily buy that. So I'm totally on board. I won't be having any Metcalf in that range.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the thing is Metcalf has the most to lose too, because I mean, even if it's like, well, JSN takes some from Lockett and some from Metcalf, that's going to hurt Metcalf drafters a lot more than it's going to hurt the Lockett drafters. So, that's another way to look at it.
Here's an interesting one. You put Metcalf and Ayuk side by side for their careers. Same dude.
Yeah.
Metcalf had 1 year where he scored more touchdowns, but you look at last year, I'm literally looking at my chart. They were almost identical in terms of Metcalf had slightly higher market share, but where they cumulatively finished out, very similar. Yet one goes in round 3 and one's going in round 6. And like, if I'm in a range where I go, okay, am I going to draft Metcalf or I can get Ayuk in round 5? Like, I'll just wait 2 rounds and take something different.
Yep. Totally makes sense.
Yeah, like I said, that little pocket at the end of the 3rd, my guy I've talked about often this offseason. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll go down with it. But I just can't get into Calvin Ridley, man. I just get this Michael Thomas feel from him. Just a lot of the off-field stuff. He hasn't necessarily played in a while. I get that he looks great in shorts and, the helmet with sponge around it or whatever it is that they're wearing these days. But at the end of the day, once you get in the game, I've never played football. I'm not going to pretend I have, but I would imagine that you get in an NFL game and the speed just kind of goes up a notch or 2 or maybe a few. And I don't know, man, like Kirk and Lawrence looked so good together last year. I don't know that Lawrence is coming in this season thinking, oh, I'm just going to he's like drooling over Ridley thinking I'm going to be giving this guy most of what I was giving Kirk or a big portion of it. I feel like Ridley's going to be the 2 in this offense. And either way, I'm not willing to bet that Ridley is at a round 3 price. And we talk about a lot of the guys going in this range. That's a high investment on a guy we didn't see last year. We haven't seen in this offense. I get they brought him in. I get they invested in him. And I get it. It's an ascending situation. I just feel that the price point is too heavy for me at Ridley. I'd rather buy Kirk in the 5th round. Scott, I don't know how you feel about it in Jacksonville.
I think, honestly, what's pushing Ridley up is he's also attached to a high-end quarterback that people just think can get even better, which I don't argue with that being true. Generally, you see receivers that finish top 12 being attached to those quarterbacks that are super efficient and pretty high volume. So he has the boxes checked. But I think what you're saying is there's other players in his offense that if you're betting on the offensive situation, there's other players you'd rather take shots on versus paying that price. And I didn't bring him up earlier, but I definitely can see Ridley being one of those guys that, he's already looking at this main board. He went at the 301.
That's nuts, dude.
And
That's nuts for me.
Ahead of T. Higgins, ahead of Mahomes and Hurts. And I'm not saying I would rather have the quarterback. It's a specific build. But with what we just said about these receivers, I'd rather construct my team in taking Mahomes or Hurts there and taking a receiver in 2 or 3 rounds versus taking Joe Burrow or Trevor Lawrence in a couple rounds. Because I think I got a better shot at that top 3 outcome. And what did I lose at the receiver? Because listen, if you draft a receiver in round 5, you're starting him every week. You're going to be able to embrace the volatility of the ups and downs. So you're just making a huge bet on Ridley. And I can see him going, listen, JD, if JT drops out and Josh Jacobs drops out, and you're going to see some teams that go wide receiver, and one of those being Calvin Ridley on the turn at the 2-3 turn. Like, you're going to see people pushing him that far up. So,
you're probably right.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts for me. Dan, I know you're a bit more bullish, I think, on Ridley than I am.
I am, but I mean, the thing is, I honestly like the 3rd and 4th round. Other than the quarterbacks and a couple other players, I just as soon grab extra picks in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round than draft in the 2nd and 3rd round. Just for a little bit of cheaper. Like if I could trade my 2nd, my 3rd, my 19th, and my 20th for an extra 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks, I'd do that all day, every day. Which is exactly why both Scott and I like auctions, because basically you can do exactly that.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do.
Yeah. What are our teams going to look like in those auctions, Dan? We're going to probably get like 3 top 15 players, and let's see, anybody going in the middle rounds, we're going to probably avoid,
That's exactly it. So, yeah.
And hopefully nobody else in those leagues is listening. Otherwise, building that team with 10 other people trying to build that type of team, you almost would rather zig and go the other way. So hopefully nobody heard that.
I'm sure 1 or 2 did, but that's all right. They'll forget by the time they get there. Honest. What do you guys think about? We should probably speed up a little bit, but what do you guys think about who's quickly a very big smash at each of the big 4 positions for you, Scott? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end.
Quarterback, I said it earlier. I think Tua, where he's going, I'm willing to take him with the same bet that we talked about earlier with, you're basically giving away 4 or 5 rounds worth of value compared to Burrow or Lawrence or Watson, just simply based on you're scared of the injury. And I want to draft a little more aggressively than that. If I get an injury, I know in that spot I can go to the waiver wire and find somebody that's replacement value. Pretty much close to that. So I'm actually was not in on Tua, but where he still remains to go. He was like the QB6 or QB7 last year when he was healthy. So I'm like, that's somebody that I'll continue to take on certain builds if we get to Vegas and he's still going in that range. Let's see. I'm just scanning right now to see who clearly fades. We already mentioned George Pickens. Jahan Dotson was another one of them. Elijah Moore is another one that I can see in Vegas is up into the top 40 or higher at receiver. I'm not a fan of Elijah Moore. Just looking at what he's done. I know he had that nice stretch for 5 games his rookie year, but pretty much everything else he doesn't check the boxes. So that's another one that I'd be willing to fade at receiver as soon as he starts jumping up higher. I don't know if he gets into the top 30, but he's getting a lot of hype this season or this off season. So that's one I would probably be fading at receiver. Running back.
Any smashes at receiver?
So depending on how I'm constructing, I think this is going to be crazy, but I think in the right construction, I think Gabe Davis is a smash. Really. I mean, outside the top 40 receivers, you have to find a build where you're going to play him. But when you look at the cumulative numbers, it's going to be fine. He's going to finish higher than where he's going. Just don't put him on a team where you go, damn, he's my 6th receiver. I'm happy to make decisions on him every week. That's going to drive you crazy. So I think that's one that's a smash. Another one that people are just not respecting at all, and if you bet against the offense from last year, Juju Smith-Schuster. Nobody talks about him, but Mac Jones' efficiency in 2021 combined with Juju from last year, which really wasn't that bad. It's just he should have smashed with Mahomes and he didn't, so he must suck now. But I mean, he's literally going outside like the top 50 receivers, and he's a guy I think you could easily see finish inside the top 36. And he's free. He's pretty much not costing you anything, whereas somebody's drafting Elijah Moore 4 rounds higher or 3 rounds higher for no reason. So that's another one I would say.
Okay. How about tight end? Any smashes there?
Oh, Dan, tight end. I'm not good at
or
tight
even if you have a fade, Scott, because we didn't touch on tight end for fade. If you have a fade or a smash at tight end, that'd be
smash. So you know what? If I had to pick a smash, I'd probably say it's Darren Waller. It's boom or bust, but you know he's going in round 5. He's going in the same range. Like I think he's far better of a bet than Dallas Goedert or Evan Ingram.
Do you think do you think he belongs ahead of Kittle? Because I've seen him creep ahead of Kittle now, which I don't know, man. I can't get on board with that.
I think they're similar bets, right? Like I think if you're designing the team around, you know what, if I draft, because you'll hear people say, I don't like Kittle, he gets injured too much or he blocks too much or whatever. Like if you draft him, you're designing your team and you're making the bet that that's your tight end. Mm-hmm. You just start him every week. You live with it. You don't try to get cute. You don't draft 2 tight ends. Like if I'm drafting a tight end in round 4, I'm not drafting another one because I can find replacement value tight ends on waivers. So I think he's a good bet. And fade at tight end, I mean, I hate to say this, but Dalton Kincaid is a fade.
Nice. That was mine. Thank you.
I mean, there's so many bets you could bet against, and he's going to be a guy that I bet you by the time we get to main events, he's going in round 8. You know, tight end 9, 8. It's ridiculous for a rookie, and for all the wrong reasons. So, yeah, Dalton Kincaid's an easy fade.
There's proof right there, just so you guys can see that I had Kincaid. And because I want to show something else on the screen after. I don't know how much you guys can see because mine is really, really small. So if you can't read it, I apologize. Let me know so I know next time to show it differently. But no, I love that. One thing I did want to show though, Scott, and I'll just switch over here while maybe you speak on it because I want to touch on it earlier. You're crushing it, Dynasty trades in 5. I'm sure anyone watching is already watching it, but if you are not and you play Dynasty, even if you don't play Dynasty, just the whole point of these, you know, the content is for you to get thoughts and input on players, right? And on values of these players. So, I mean, you guys talk about trades with picks and so on, but even if you're playing, you know, other platform or other formats, you're going to benefit from hearing Scott, our buddy Shane, who we've had on the show a few times. And then remind me, the third is?
Clay is our host. He's the one that actually delegates things so Shane and I don't talk for 3 hours every show.
Yes, and he does it. He's awesome. Does he do a lot of the production? I feel like he's the production guy too, no?
He doesn't. We have an editor. Like we have a full-time editor that edits all of our shows and everything. But yeah, he is definitely it's a rare thing, and you're very good at it, JD, as being a host of a show that can delegate things especially when there's, I mean, you guys have had some shows with 4 or 5 people besides yourself on. There's no time for you to give your opinion on everything. You have to be able to move from topic to topic. That's what Clay does well. He delegates. He'll chime in every once in a while, and I try to throw him a bone and just say, hey, Clay, what are your thoughts? Otherwise, it's like, does this guy even play Dynasty? But no, he's a very good host, which is it's a lost art in the content space right now. So shout out to him.
I agree. I was telling Balky the same thing. Like when I watch, he's really good at that, at kind of giving, you know, the spotlight to those on the show, and you know, especially when you're running tight on time. But no, I appreciate you saying that. The one thing I did want to bring up as well is you have something new coming up that was announced, I believe, today, and maybe you can touch on that. I'm going to try to bring up what I saw online today.
Yeah, we have myself, Ray Garvin, are doing a show called Destination Chill, which is going to be basically the data mind meets the football mind. We are just going to talk ball, all things Dynasty, all things fantasy, all things NFL. We're going to be doing a show. It starts Sunday night, 8 o'clock on Destination Devi. So just Ray and I, really off the cuff. I've been a big member in his Destination Devi community, do my Dynasty show on Destination Devi. There's a lot of times where him and I just literally sit in there and talk, and we just decided to put it to a YouTube show. So it's going to be a YouTube-only show, Sunday nights, just Ray and I talking ball. So it's and I'll just leave everybody with this. We can sit here, we can all give our opinions on players, we can all give our opinions on what we think is going to happen. I'm really making it a big big thing for me this year to really think about why you're making decisions. If you're in this to play serious fantasy football, if you're in this going, you know what, I'm playing with X amount of dollars, I'm playing in X amount of leagues, like my goal is to win. If you just want to have fun, then fine, do what makes it fun, right? But if you're in this, like I'm really trying to be analytical and make smart decisions, think about all the outcomes. Think about how much variance there's going to be in a fantasy football season. Think about how wrong we can be with things we just know are for sure. Okay, what if we're slightly wrong and the other outcome happens? So it's just making your decisions with correlation, I think, across the board, whether it's redraft, dynasty, best ball. Just think about why you're making the decisions and what the ripple effects are. And it really makes it fun to build teams when you have that mindset versus just picking versus ADP.
Dan, the timing might be right because I was seeing something on Twitter about a storm coming to Ontario, and now I'm hearing it on my head. So it might, I don't know if you guys hear it, it gets annoying, just let me know. But I know we had a few more questions we wanted to ask Scott. Dan, I'm going to let you have the honors to just maybe pick one last one that you want to throw his way before we kind of get to the back end of this show, because we're already at $120. I don't want to keep Scott. We could keep Scott here for forever and keep going, but we wouldn't want to do that. Yeah,
I think we've kind of indirectly hit some of what we wanted to talk about later, so that's totally fine. And to Scott's point, I mean, that's something that we've been preaching often on this show, and I think Scott's exactly right about, is make sure your team tells a consistent story all the way across, and that. You can weave together a few different stories. You can weave together a story about maybe the Bengals and a story about the Steelers or whatever, but make sure that it all kind of makes sense with each other together, and really how I build my teams is I sort of mix and match some of those stories. Okay, well, I'm going to go, this one's getting a more Bengals theme because that's what's being presented to me, or another one might be getting more of a Chargers theme because that's what's being presented to me. Two offenses that I like a lot and I think are going to do well and I want pieces of, and so I'm just kind of mixing and matching what I'm doing there, but I want to make sure that within each team, everything's consistent, and Scott said it perfectly with, with the Ravens, because you've got, you don't want to be drafting Mark Andrews and J.K. Dobbins together necessarily. So that's the most important thing, I think. But Scott, are there any value pockets that you've been seeing developing at any of the four major positions in any of the contests or just in general? Where you're like, yeah, this is a place where I really have been mining wide receiver consistently, or are you trying to vary your builds up so you're grabbing sometimes running backs from a particular area of the draft and sometimes taking wide receivers, or how are you approaching all that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think if you're really looking at things like from a warp perspective, like I have, it creates natural value pockets. Definitely right after the range we were talking about before, where you start getting into the third round receivers and all the way down to the receivers you can get in round 5 and round 6. So I think you can look at that for receiver and say, realistically, you may have your preferences. Realistically, you can tell yourself a story on why this player has a higher ceiling than that player. But I think generally you can go into that portion of the draft. And you even said it, Dan, like if I could trade out of that range, I don't mind picking twice in the 6th if I can get an extra first or I can get an extra second, right? Yep. And that just tells me that when you're thinking about building your teams, you got to know your room. You got to be able to follow your board. But it's almost like when I go in, let's say round 3 through round 6, I probably want to get 2 receivers in that range. But I don't really care who, and I just want to make sure it correlates with some of the other picks that I've made. But if that means I got to go round 5 and round 6, fine. If it means maybe round 3 and round 6 in another room, fine. But I've kind of committed that in that range, I got to hit at least 2 of them for the way that I'm going to want to build. And I think that's definitely the case at receiver. With tight end, that's probably – and it's funny because that's probably the range if you look at all the positions aside from quarterback, where you go, all right, I'm fine fading tight ends in that range. We already talked about Ingram and Kittle and Waller. Like, what type of team you're building if you draft Waller. You're probably not taking a second tight end, so just know that. And then with the quarterbacks, that's probably a range where you go, all right, if I can get a guy like Jalen Hurts in round 3, I'll take him. If I could get Mahomes in round 3, I'll take him. But I know what type of team I'm building there. And then I think the last thing is if you're going to take a strategy like that and you're going to build something that's extreme. I talked to JJ Zacharyson about this recently, and I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially in redraft leagues, is they build for a certain structure, but they don't account for the fact that there is variance and there is a waiver wire. And sometimes you have to kind of play, especially if you're playing in a main event. Like, it's a big deal to win your league, you know? You win $7,000 if you win your league in a main event. I know we all want to win the million. I know we all want to win the big money. But I think sometimes playing your league mates and kind of leaning into, you know, don't let the team that went 4 receivers early, don't let them feast on all the running backs in the mid round. Build a team where you go, you know what, I took 2 early running backs. I'm going to keep taking them to make their life a little more difficult. You know, like, and you just kind of challenge that you're going to be able to make up the gap. So I think it's always having that game theory mindset, especially if you're in a higher stakes league. Like, that's where the ROI is. Like, we can both be realistic that if I have 10 main events, the odds I'm going to win $2 million or $1 million is pretty low. So let's focus on like the low hanging fruit of kind of just playing the psychology of the other managers and the builds in my league.
Yeah, and it's fine to, you know, build with an eye towards the, you know, the money weeks of the contest and all that. But, you know, the thing is, you've got to make it there.
You got to get
And,
there. Yeah.
you know, if you're not in your league's playoffs, you know, the money weeks don't matter. So, most important thing is getting to those league playoffs and then worry about the rest of it, because you know, really those last 3 weeks, it comes down to a lot of variance that we really can't predict. You know, people love to sit there and say, "Oh, well, you know, I saw this one game coming from a mile away," and that, you know, but they conveniently forget about the fact that they talked about 10 other games that they saw coming from a mile away that were going to happen in week 17, and
so
none of them ended up mattering. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
well, I did pick that one though. That kind of stuff matters less than people think it does.
Scott, I want to ask you this to finish this off. I used to ask, you know, back in the day when Dan and I did this show, kind of the two of us, I used to always ask at the end, what's like a tool or something that you use, especially guys that we respect. You talked about Warp often tonight, and you talked about a website that you use, I believe, or maybe you can expand on that a bit, or whether it's on Warp or where you get that information and how you use it.
Yeah, so I was mentioning the Warp tool. It's southharmonff.com. You literally just sync your league, and if there's a sync that you can't use, so like it doesn't support FFPC, but you can literally create all the FFPC leagues are the same. You can create the settings like on Sleeper in 2 minutes, and you sync it, and you literally just look at the historic distribution of wins above replacement. So in theory, you know, you're chasing as much of that on your roster as you can get, and then you're just having to set it in the lineup and make sure you capture it. So that's how I'm building my teams, to be honest. I'm using that for any format that I'm in. I'm using that as a roadmap, not for players. It doesn't tell you. You can't look at last year's Warp for a player and say that's what a player is going to do this year. But it gives you, like, I could show you 3 years worth of Warp data, JD, and you would have a roadmap of how you want to construct your team. Now it's on you to go and say, what players do I want to put into that construction? And that's where you can diversify. That's where you can have your own opinions. Mine and Dan might be totally different players, but I think generally we'll be constructing or building our teams very similarly. So I'm using that for any league that I do. Any league I get into, I'm using it.
Can you repeat that website? Because I keep missing it for some reason.
It is southharmonff.com. And there's a button that says Warp, and you can try it. You can actually use the Trades in 5 code, which is Trades in 5. You can get it 20% off for a month. And literally you can sync all of your leagues in there, and you can look at the charts. So try it out. Look at the charts. It doesn't tell you what players to pick, but it gives you a roadmap on kind of where the leverage points. And to Dan's point, you didn't ask it this way, Dan, but where are the pockets? It'll show you whenever you see a flat line, you go, that's kind of a pocket that I'm willing to just settle for the cheapest option in that range. So I think it's a valuable tool regardless of where you play, to just view your league in there. So it's pretty cool.
I'll drop the link. Yeah, I'll drop the link in the show description after the show, just so you guys can have it, because that's something I wasn't aware of. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Scott, and I appreciate the time that you give us, man. Like I said, we value, whether it's dynasty, redraft, big tournament, small tournament. You're just a great guy to talk fantasy with. Obviously, clearly you're crushing out there. We love that you're putting out awesome content, and it's crushing, because then we get to hear more of you. And now, of course, with Ray GQ, I'm sure you guys will be awesome together. So happy that you're, getting yourself out there. We're happy that you were able to join us tonight, and happy that you have something new coming out, because I'm excited to see that you and Ray GQ going back and forth is going to be fun for sure. So good luck with that new venture, and with the rest of your off season. Dude, I cannot wait to hang out with you a bit in Vegas in September, and maybe have a beer or two.
Yeah, looking forward to meeting you guys. Met Dan last year, so looking forward to meeting you this year, JD, and good stuff. I'll come on anytime. You guys do a great work.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate
Awesome.
it. Dan, this was great. You have any parting words? I know we've got, I'm away. I leave Monday for Portugal, so I'll be gone for a couple weeks. You're going to be manning the fort. I do still have a show, Ball In, that I did with Matty Kiwoom that'll be dropping tomorrow. Anything else, Dan? I know you've got some names lined up.
Yeah, we've got Nelson Sousa lined up for next Thursday, and so that'll be a fun one. And also, I'm gonna find a time to do a draft with Nelson as well. Dwayne McFarland and Chad Schroeder have both agreed to be on the show. We're still working on dates, but we're gonna get them in as well. So we're gonna have some heavy hitters coming at you in August. It's Scott is the tip of the iceberg here. That's you always want to have a good leadoff hitter. That's what we got with Scott, and then the rest of the way, man, it's all guys who can just bang and mash. So it's gonna be fun.
I love it, guys. Enjoy. Remember, go check out Player Profiler. We're dropping the FFPC backstage show. Enjoy the Cleveland New York game. I know it's just like Hall of Fame game. Rogers on the sideline with the headphones on, but it's football, right? We get something out of it. It'll be fun to watch. Hopefully you guys found this fun to watch and got some value out of it. Keep crushing those drafts, guys. There's money to be made. There's a couple $1 million tournaments on the FFPC right now. There's a $200,000 best ball tournament going on right now. And there's even a $50K Superflex that you can buy in for $35. Use the code GOAT as your first deposit. You'll get a bonus. Keep smashing those drafts, guys. We appreciate you, and we'll check you all later.
Go district, the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text. That trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.